Okay, we are live. I am Courtney Cagle.
I'm Lehua Corpaz.
I'm Taylor Arajo.
Angel Abbott.
And we're here for our Amazing Grace final Google Hangouts for our group. So we'll go ahead and get started with question number 1. What doctrine in Wilbur's heart drove him to advocate? Why is the doctrine of the family so important to have in your heart, to be passionate and persistent?
I can go first. So one thing that I thought doctrine-wise that he had in his heart was that we're all sons and daughters of God, and he wanted everyone to be treated equally and to be treated as sons and daughters of God. And he saw that what was being done to the slaves was immoral, and so he took the action that was needed to stop that treatment. And I think that it's important for us to have the doctrine of family in our hearts and to be passionate and persistent, is because it's not always a one and done, fought the fight, now you win, it's over, let's go, have some ice cream about it. It's sometimes you have to fight for days and weeks and months or an entire lifetime. And if you're not passionate about it and you're not persistent, then nothing will get done. And so you're going to have to really want to fight the fight and to be passionate about it, or it's not going to seem worth it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. That was one of the ones that I had, was that he believed that every man should be equal, and he believed that God made men equal. And that was the main doctrine that drove him to advocate. And I also think another doctrine was just like one of his beliefs was that he was the one who had to make a change. It was his task to make a change. He believed that God gave him this task. And so because of that, he felt that he had to advocate and he had to actually stand up for these people who couldn't stand up for themselves. And then to answer the second question, I also agree with you, Taylor, of course. And if we aren't passionate about the family, then we aren't really going to do anything about it. If we're just, if we're like, oh, the family's important, yeah, whatever, then we'll just sit on the sidelines and we won't actually make a difference. But if we are passionate about it, then we will constantly strive to stand up for the family and to share our beliefs with others and share the importance of family in our hearts.
Angel, you're muted.
Sorry, I have background noise. I just said that I agreed with you guys that he believed that everybody was equal. And that I guess he had to have a belief that it didn't matter what color your skin were or who you were equal, which a lot of people didn't necessarily believe. And then I talked about passion and persistence. Talked about it kind of setting an example too, like if you are passionate about it and, always have it in mind, sometimes it sets an example to other people, like the guy that said, I've sat a long time, against you. I want to see what it's like to be with you, because he saw that they were passionate and they weren't going to give up. And so he thought, let's give this a try, I guess, kind of what it seemed like to me. So I guess that just, it helps other people be motivated too.
Good points. I put similar points to you guys that like all men are created equal and that we're children of God. But another thing that I put was Wilbur was promoting light and truth. And then I'm not going to read my paragraph, but I just talked about like, just like President Russell M. Nelson said, whether truth emerges from a scientific laboratory or through revelation. All truth emanates from God. All truth is part of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Truth is truth. It's not, divisible, and any part of it cannot be set aside. So, he was standing for truth and righteousness, and he advocated throughout his whole life. He didn't just do it like on a weekend or, one time. He did it throughout his whole life, which is how we should be advocating, for the family, because it's something that we believe in and that is so vital to Heavenly Father's plan. So it's important, to not just be like a weekend warrior, but to be consistent with our degree. Okay. So I'm going to go to number 2, unless anybody has anything additional. No? Okay. Number 2, how did Wilbur employ a theoretical Bronfenbrenner approach to become a more effective advocate? Identify at least one thing in each system and be specific.
So for this one, I laid out the systems and then I wrote what I felt was right for each system. And so for microsystem, I think the biggest person who played a role was John. He's kind of like family for Wilbur, and he helped Wilbur to actually decide to become an advocate, and he helped him to be more effective because when he visited John the first time, he was asking, if he should live in solitude and praise God, or if he should, go and be an advocate. And John said that he still had work to do. And so he pushed him to be an advocate. And because of that, it helped Wilbur to know that he had work to do, and it helped him to be more effective because even John was standing by his side saying, you need to do this. This is what you need to do with your life. This is important for you. And he also provided him with his personal experience, and it helped Wilbur to get a deeper understanding of the cruelty of all that was going on with the slaves. And I'll just share one more. For the macro system, I said that his religious beliefs helped him to be more effective because, as we said before, he believed that God created men to be equal. And if he didn't have this belief, he probably wouldn't have been a very effective advocate because he wouldn't have believed that everyone was equal. And most people who believe that all men are equal believe that God created us to be that way, no matter what our skin color, no matter our ethnicity, no matter what we plan to do with our life. God created men to be equal, and he believed that, and that was his core belief that drove him to be an advocate.
So I had a macro system that was similar to yours, but mine was that it was his understanding of the arguments against him, that he used a lot of his knowledge. He was very, I guess the word insightful. He was able to take the information that he had, gain more information, and use that as a strong argument. And that, to me, is what made him most effective, was the fact that he understood the arguments against him, and he used the resources that he had to build stronger arguments for him. One of the, let's see, I'm trying to read my paragraph, sorry. One thing that I can't remember which system I put this in because I just have this under a bullet. But one of the effective things that he did was remove the loopholes of transportation, making the slave transportation more difficult, which maybe I put that with my micro, which was an intelligent thing to do because that ended up helping them a lot to be able to use those outside resources and to be able to remove and prove a lot of things that were against them. So I put that as a microsystem.
Yeah, I kind of feel like I took a different angle on this question than you guys did. So I'm not sure if I did it right. But I kind of talked about like, well, I said that he looked at, I guess he like kind of like you said with the shipping. I felt like he used different methods to get into different systems and, you know, affect how they affect, like with the shipping, he got into that and changed that so it affected slave trade. But I talked about like with the microsystem, like people just in their home stopped, you know, using sugar in their drinks, because the sugar was from slave plantations. And that seemed like you know, just in the homes of people, it was a way to get their message out, I guess. And I talked about, like more of the, like, I guess I put, where is it? Sorry, I'm trying to read exactly what I wrote. You talked about him using the exosystem as in like, you know, their government and stuff to make laws changed. They presented bills and those kinds of things seem like going to a higher level past the community immediately. So I just talked about how I use the different sets of the system in different ways. That made any sense.
For the micro system, I talked about how he advocated with his immediate family, mainly his wife, Barbara Spooner. And he, you know, she got him to open up and she supported him and she gave him strength, you know, to carry on with his cause. And she was good about, you know, bringing out things in him that he felt were too difficult to talk about. And through her encouragement, this helped him to further his work as, you know, she helped him to see how important his work truly was. So, so that was one thing. And then for the meso, let's see, I talked about how he advocated with his cousin, and then also his friend, William Pitt, the prime minister, and how together they did a lot of good. And also throughout his community by, you know, having the meetings with the people. And also with John Newton, how he got him to open up more and to eventually begin writing his own book, you know, about the experiences that he had as the captain, John Newton. And for my macro, I put that he advocated in Parliament to abolish slavery. So does anybody else have anything else they'd like to say? Okay, let's go to number 3. How did Wilbur and his fellow advocates do and share their research? What evidence did they provide to persuade those opposing or on the fence?
So I had a couple different things. So the first thing is I put, they did their research and collected ship records. They had witnesses, and he wrote down and made records of his own findings. And then he brought this information in front of Parliament to show them what was being done to slaves. He showed items like chains and the box that showed the space they had to lie in, having them smell the slave ship. Those, I mean, using your senses was a very strong, I guess, persuader. You know, when you use not just what you hear, but what you see and what you smell, and you use that to kind of make the situation more real, that helped. And then they also didn't do a lot of like religious talk. They were very political. They kept the political and social pressure as their focus, and so it was relatable to everyone, and was not just relatable to religious people. And I think that helped persuade their opposing fences.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I actually didn't think of that when I was writing this question, but they really didn't use religion or morality as like their persuasion tool. You know, they just shared evidence, they just shared proof that this, was wrong. They didn't actually say like this is so immoral. They weren't trying to make anybody guilty. They were just giving them the proof and saying, take it and do what you want with it. So what I said for this one, so for them, they, a lot of them in the group actually had been on the ships and had seen what happened to the slaves. And even Iquano was a slave himself, so he was really experienced. And one of the ways that they shared their research was Iquano actually published his account of the years he spent as a slave, and it ended up selling over 50,000 copies in 2 months, which is amazing because people are actually interested in it. People don't understand what's actually happening. When you're on the outside, you don't see how bad it actually is. And so that's why they knew that bringing those people on the Madagascar would be super effective, because they were like, oh, well, if they see it and they smell it, like you were saying, if they use their senses, they'll realize just how terrible this actually is. And if we are able to tell them, like, there were 600 people who went across on the Madagascar and only 200 people actually got off the ship, so just like explaining the facts. He didn't even try to say, it's wrong to do this. He just said, this is what happened. And remember, God made men equal. And then that was it. That was his speech to them. And it really got through to them because he used evidence, but he also used emotion and senses. And then another thing that I said was James, I believe he was an attorney. He actually brought transcripts of the trials and of the Africans who were convicted of crimes that they didn't actually commit, and they were burnt alive. And so he had those transcripts showing that that happened. And he also had transcripts of the firsthand accounts, the different figures and the different statistics showing everything that was happening. So that was really good research that he provided them with.
Yeah, I kind of talked about a lot of the same things you guys have already mentioned. I talked about, personal testimonies that they gathered from, John, his preacher friend, and the book that was written. And I talked about, that they shared the, like you said, what they saw on the boats, and just the reality of what, slave trade meant for slaves. And they allowed other people to see that, or smell that, I guess, through the, little boat trip that they took. So they shared things that way. And then they had the petition signed to not just prove, that slaves didn't necessarily want it, but that other people in their country didn't want slave trade to continue. And they presented that petition as proof. And I guess just they looked into the reality of what was going on in the situation through first-hand accounts or other research, that kind of way. Anyways, that's what I found.
I agree. I put a lot of the same things that you guys did. I put they had the people feel emotions such as sadness and sorrow of what the slaves went through on the ships. And then the example was when Lord Fox took the ship out, with his friends, and they were drinking and having a good time with the music, and then they stopped the music. He stopped the music and the ship, and it was parked right next to the slave ship. And all the people in attendance at the little party, they smelled that horrible smell of death. And then they began weeping and covering their noses. And they began to feel the emotions that Lord Fairfax and Wilbur wanted them to feel. So just by showing them and having them experience was a very powerful way. Another thing I put was that they showed the shackles that the slaves were forced to wear. And they showed them how they were placed on their wrists and their hands and their feet and their neck. And it kind of humanized the barbaric treatment that the slaves had to endure. And I think seeing the shackles made it more real, to witness, and also to hear the loud pounding as the shackles were dropped, like on the wooden table. It showed how heavy they were and how horrible they were, with causing broken shoulders or hips to the slaves that were bound in them. And they told stories of the slaves. And we know that storytelling is a powerful way to teach. And they told how horrible they were treated, so that, people would feel these emotions and remember the stories. Like an example was when Wilbur was below the ship with Equano, and Equano was telling Wilbur and showing Wilbur the horrible conditions, that the slaves had to endure while they were on the ships. So I will go to number 4. How does the film portray the importance of working together as a group? What has family advocacy group work taught you? Why do you think it's a good idea to discuss your thoughts with your peers each week in the HOA meetings?
So for this one, I started by talking about how in the beginning of the film, the men and women worked together to get Wilbur to advocate. Like we were talking about previously, they would use different tactics to get him to advocate. By showing him this is the ship, like you were saying, like Equano showed him the ship and showed him the conditions, and then they showed him the shackles and everything, just so that he could see how real it is, because he was one of those people who had to see it to believe it. And so they brought him stuff so that he could actually see it for himself. And so they worked together to get him to advocate in the first place, and it worked. And then throughout this whole process, they worked together to bring their own insight and share their knowledge and experience in order for each of them to gain a deeper understanding of it, and also to be better advocates. And I think without this group working together, it would have been difficult for Wilbur to actually make a difference, because it would have been really hard without support from other people to make a difference with something so huge as slavery. And then for the second part, what has family advocacy group work taught you? So for me, I've seen that through group work, I'm able to learn things from the readings and videos that I wouldn't have learned without talking to you guys. Things that I didn't even notice until you brought it up, and then I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Like, I didn't realize that before. And it's really nice to see everybody's insights and see the different points of view. And I think that's why it's so important to have these discussions, because we can see other people's views, we can learn from them, we can reevaluate our own, and we can grow.
Okay. I like what you said, Courtney. I kind of had the same kind of thoughts, as I'm sure most of us did. But I think that the film portrayed the importance of working together as a group in showing us how many different tasks Wilbur had to go through, and how often he had help, and how he constantly had someone helping him. And I think the bigger the task seemed and the more help he had, the more it just confirmed to me that some things, I mean, God will help us if we're, doing his work. If we have to stand alone, we have to stand alone, but it's so much easier and so much more effective to have help. And the kind of their strength in numbers, I believe that, like, there's no way that I could have done what he did on my own. And I think that kind of applies to our HOA meetings as well, where like Courtney said, you guys bring different thoughts and sparks of ideas to my mind that I don't get necessarily on my own. And I think that it's also really comforting each week when we meet together to discuss different things that we're doing or different thoughts that we had about the topics that kind of make me think that I'm, remember that I'm not alone. Because I think that that can be the most effective thing in some cases where maybe I'm physically here alone, but in the fight for families and in the causes that we stand against, I know I'm not alone. And I know that that was sort of a factor for Wilbur as well, to be able to have, different types of emotional and physical and different types of support that he needed from those that were also in the fight with him.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you guys have said. I talked about the idea that groups provide like lots of different I guess contacts maybe, or different ways into different, to advocate your whatever it is you're advocating for better. Like one of them was a slave, so he could share his perspective as, having been a slave, and one of them had worked on a slave ship, so he could share his perspective, and one of them was very involved in politics, so he could help in the political end of things, and just different, and his wife, helped support him at home, and just everybody provided something that made the group function better and helped them get farther. Or their friend that they had try to go persuade, it didn't work, but try to go persuade the guy playing cards. Like, he had a political sway with whoever it was that they needed to convince at that moment. Anyways, I just noticed that they all contributed something, and none of them could have contributed it together. I talked about how the HOA meetings, like you guys kind of said, gives you perspectives, or sometimes it just confirms that, other people feel the same way. And it gives you kind of a chance. Sometimes I don't know if you guys had that, but I felt like sometimes it was something I felt strongly about in the reading, and I just wanted to share it with somebody just to, have somebody else hear it or agree or disagree. And we build off of each other sometimes in the group, I think. So it, takes our ideas a little farther. So I think that's all I've had for that one.
You guys always make a lot of great points. I put that one of the ways, the importance of working together as a group, was an example was like when they rolled the petition out in Parliament with all the signatures, and then how Lord Fairfax walked up and signed his signature to the document. That was a really powerful scene where it showed how they were all working together as a group, because one person couldn't have done all of that. So I thought that was an important thing. And family advocacy group work, it's taught me that it's okay to speak up, even when others feel differently. And it's also taught me that by working together, that strength is felt and derived. And by discussing my thoughts, with you guys each week, it helps me to get into the action of advocacy. It's like the first step in a safe and comfortable environment, with working with others who feel the same way that I do. So it also helps to aid us in learning how to talk politely and professionally to others who may or may not agree with us. And just like Angel mentioned, how we all need others, like Wilbur had all of the support from those around him. I put that, we need others in our lives to accomplish things. And then I gave an example of how Richard Wilkins, the author of The Sacred Duty, he was able to accomplish so much through the help of so many others. And, he didn't do it on his own. Like Wilbur, wasn't able to do this on his own. He had all this extra help from the good people that he had surrounded himself with. Okay, so number 5. What parallels do you see between Wilbur and Captain Moroni in Alma 46? What is a Christian and professional family advocate, and how did Wilbur exemplify that? How can you be effective and Christ-like against such loud and often degrading voices?
Okay, so first, I'm going to say we have 30 minutes, so we kind of need to shorten our answers a little bit because we have like 7 questions. So I'm just going to say a couple little things. So the first is Captain Moroni stood with the title of liberty to oppose with those who would take their basic freedoms away. And Wilbur also took a stand and fought for what people. And then regarding being a Christian family advocate, I said that Wilbur was a Christian advocate because he stood up for all men and believed that all men created all men. And in order for me to be effective in my advocacy, I must be diligent, persistent, passionate, persuasive, and kind.
So I had a couple of the same things as you. One thing that I had that was a little bit different was that when it came to what is a Christian and a professional family advocate, a Christian in my mind is a true believer, and a pro advocate is a licensed true believer. They both have the same foundation. One is just licensed to do what they do. And I think that is exemplified by Wilbur because he is a true believer. He does what he needs to do to present himself in a way that others know what he believes, and he advocates for those things. Neither one of them, and this is in the comparison with Wilbur and Moroni, neither allowed the ways of the world to stand against them. They were both advocates for what they believed. Moroni stands for what he believes in, and he finds a way to spread the word, and so did he gathered people to stand together, and Wilbur did the same. And they led by example, and they remained respectful and professional regardless of their circumstances. And I think that is how they can continue to be Christ-like in their situations, is by remaining professional and respectful, and leading by example.
Yeah, I agree. I just talked about the idea of how they both stood up for what they believed, and it was kind of a, even if our beliefs are unpopular, we're still going to stand up for them, and they encouraged other people to do the same. And I mean, Captain Moroni kind of, he gave his, he gave a lot to it. And he basically said, he'd give everything to it. And Wilbur didn't stop. Even, I mean, he was even unhealthy, and he still tried to keep going. I felt like, being, where was it? Sorry, reading the question. I think that sometimes, like, just being firm in belief, but not criticizing other people. Like, he never said, like we said earlier, he never said, you guys are immoral, you guys are wrong. He was firm in what he believed, but he didn't say somebody else couldn't believe what they believed or couldn't, was wrong. He let them make that decision. So sometimes just, not getting mad or angry or upset at somebody else, just being kind and loving, even when there is opposition, is important.
I put that they were both men of character and great humility. Oops. And that they both commanded respect. And that Wilbur and Captain Moroni, they both fought against the iniquity of the land with the help of God. They fought for the freedom of the children of men. And what's interesting to note is they both used flags in doing so. Moroni raised the title of liberty, and Wilbur with the using the flags, the ship's flags to distinguish the ships that were carrying the slaves. Thought that was an interesting parallel. An example that Wilbur used was when he stopped the carriage at the beginning, when he saw the horse being beaten, and he got out and he stopped the abuse by using only one sentence to the people that were whipping the horse. So thought that was really powerful. And a Christian and professional family advocate, to me, displays humility and strength along with respect for all others, even when they're in the midst of disagreements. And I felt Wilbur did that very well. And also this type of an advocate, a Christian advocate and professional, they would not stoop to belittle others or to lie or to cheat just to get their own way. And they also wouldn't ignite hostility or bullying, just so they can get their cause through. So I thought those were some points that I had mentioned. We'll go on to number 6. Marcia Barlow spoke on persuasive speaking and writing. Did Wilbur and others exemplify any of Marcia's ideas? How so?
So I had a lot of thoughts. At first I was like, oh, what did Marcia say? Like, I kind of forgot what she said. So I had to go back and remind myself. But one of the things that I noticed was that he spoke to do good in the world. She talked about, making others feel good and and actually doing good. And so he spoke to actually do good in the world. And he would tell stories to get his point across. He would use narrative, and many others would use narrative as well. Like Equano, he shared his personal story and sold many copies because people were so interested in his narrative. But they also would use evidence. They use both the evidence and the narrative to share their story.
I put that she talks about speaking quietly and respectfully and not talking about God so much, but bringing in facts. And as we know, Wilbur does that. The motivations that apply to everyone and to be clear and prepared. And he does that. And he was more compelling because he was passionate and confident. And those are also things that she suggested.
I talked about his conviction in his speaking. He spoke firmly and confidently. And I talked about she kind of gave her personal, experience with it. And I guess it's not quite the same thing, but he gave personal experience, or I guess he gave others personal experience, but in his arguments, and just being confident, I guess, was the biggest thing I noticed. And doing good. Short.
Let's see. One thing I put was Wilbur used personal experiences of the slaves to get others to see the horrible conditions that they lived in during their journey on the ships. And I felt that Marcia Barlow gave us a lot of helpful information in her presentation. She talked about, no matter the situation, tell a story. Stories are how we make sense of our lives. And the more the listeners understand a story, they experience the exact same brain patterns as the storyteller. Also, they didn't attack others. Also, they didn't bring religion into their advocacy in their abolishment of slavery. And they used research and knowledge. Oh, and another thing, they tried to change the policy and the law legally. For example, when that lawyer found a great way for them to reintroduce the abolishment of slavery. So those were some of the points that I had put. Number 7, what role did the government, policy, and religious freedom play in the fight of the slave trade? Did you see their political system being pro-family? Why or why not? Answer all questions.
Okay, so I'll answer what role the government played. Without the type of government that they had, they wouldn't have been able to fight the slave trade at all. Because he was able to speak up and actually able to create a bill, which he would bring to the House of Commons or Parliament. And because he was able to do that, they were actually able to abolish slavery eventually. It took a long time. But eventually they were able to do it because of the type of government that they had. And the political system, I said, wasn't pro-family. I said that I wasn't worried, the system wasn't worried about families. They were just worried about, I'm saying it's like it's a person. The system was just worried about the country's gains, losses, and the money. They weren't worried about the families. And I also said that there were some people involved in the political system who were more pro-family, but the system itself wasn't pro-family.
I kind of was half and half on that one, Courtney, where to me the government, I guess like the political system, they were pro-family, but they are also not. And I say that because they were concerned about families, but the families of their own. They were concerned about who was going to they understood that it was because of slaves that a lot of things were being accomplished within homes, that the farming and the housework and all that stuff that was done by slaves helped sustain families. And so they were worried about families, but where they were not pro-family is where they failed to acknowledge the families of slaves. So they were concerned about families, just not all of them, not equally. And so I was kind of half and half on that. And then what was the other question? The role of government policy. And so the role that they played, this was just a side note that I put funny how they were the enemy, but became the allies. They were ones who made the slave trade, but then they helped abolish it. So I think that their role was that the government was part of it and then ended up being their allies in the end. So they played a big part because they were really the ones that could put a legal stop to things.
Yeah, I talked about the government, having the ultimate say on the policies. And I talked about how that when they had that moment of instability, I guess, they had the problem that the instability of the government made it so that abolitionists faced false accusations and such about their support of the government. And so that kind of played a role in a negative way. But that the government, ultimately passed the policy to the change to allow, to end slavery or slave trade. And I talked about local policies like the shipping with the flags. That was changed, and that helped and like put a stop to slave trade. So and for the pro-family, I had a hard time with that. I think the government was focused more on the wealth and the money and prestige of their individual people. But I guess I could see how, that focus is pro-family for them, like we kind of said. But they didn't really give any thought to African families. And so it was, not as pro-family as it could have been. It depended on who you were, I guess, in the government and in the social classes.
Lots of great answers. I like your viewpoints, guys. I had put that the majority of the British Parliament opposed the fight of the slave trade. because that's how the law was currently at the time, and that's what they all believed in. With the exception of a select few, like it said at the beginning of the movie when it was it had the writing at the beginning. And then I also put something from earlier in our class, was just because truth is rejected or not popular doesn't make it any less true. And so Wilbur's fight was truly inspired. Another thing I put was that the British Parliament, to me, it didn't seem pro-family, because most of them were in favor of slavery, and slavery tore families apart because children and mothers and fathers were all spread apart. They weren't together. And also they allowed on the ships the slave women to be raped. So I put that they did not seem pro-family. But I like how you guys have made that point that it depended on what social class you are from. So, yeah. We'll go to number 8. Do you feel that Wilbur used his time on earth well? How did you see him showing the elements of consecration that Elder Christofferson spoke of?
So yes, he definitely spent his time on Earth well, because he tried to make a difference the whole time. And he was always trying to do something good in the world and always start to do it is right. I mean, even from the beginning, like who was talking about before with the horse. I mean, he didn't like how they were beating the horse, so he said something to them. I mean, an animal, like he cares so much about every living creature that he wanted to make a difference, even just for that one horse. And so sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. Okay, so consecration that Elder Christopherson spoke of. Okay, so I said that he was willing to give his life to God, and he did. He gave his life to God in the sense that he gave his life to all men, which is giving his life to God, and he believed that God created all men equally, and so he continued to stand up for his belief even when he was sick, even when it was really tough, even when his group of people kind of dispersed and they weren't really there to support him anymore. He still stood up for what he believed in, and his life was a life of labor, and he was constantly working for slaves to be freed and for everyone to have equality.
I have a little excerpt that I'll read really quickly. Yes, no doubt about it. He didn't seem to waste any time on earth. No greater cause than to take care of our brothers and sisters. His times, talents, relationships, when he delayed his marriage, he dedicated his life and everything he had to helping his brothers and sisters. And so I agree with Courtney. He did demonstrate that well in his life.
First of all, sorry, I have a little human being on my lap. So if you guys see a head, that's yeah. But I agree that he gave everything to it, and he even to the point that he kind of wanted to just go be like his preacher friend and spend time with God, I guess, in a church in solitude. But he gave his career, I guess, to politics and to making a difference for slave trade instead. And he gave all of his time, even his health in some ways, to making this difference. And so I felt like he used his time well for that. And I guess to me that is consecration. There was nothing he was going to hold back. If it costed him his reputation, if it cost him his time, his health, his career, anything, he gave it. Which consecration is just giving up everything we have, I guess. So.
I agree with all of you. Definitely, yes. Wilbur used his time well on earth. He used his use of time and freedom of choice to help abolish slavery. Um, and he did that, it was a 20-year fight for him. His life was that of giving of himself and his service to bettering the lives of others. He fought throughout his life until all slavery was abolished throughout the British colonies. He, used his time and talents how God would want him to. And even when he grew weary from ill health, he still continued on with his fight, regardless of how poor his health was. And he devoted his whole life to the cause of abolishing slavery. Some other things that I noted that he had done was he advocated for child labor laws. He campaigned for education of the blind and deaf. He founded organizations such as the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, which is the RSPCA. And he also founded the National Gallery of Art. So go to number 9. Any other profound thoughts or personal insights from the movie that are related to child and family advocacy?
Okay, so first of all, we have 8 minutes left, so we need to keep it a little bit shorter. But I'll just share 2 things that I thought of. So the first was that you can do both the work of God and the work of a political activist or a family advocate, because being a family advocate is the work of God, because family is central to God's plan. And another one was a quote from the movie, God sometimes does his work with gentle drizzles, not storms. That was said by John. And that, for me, I paralleled that with being a family advocate. We can do it in gentle drizzles, and we will make a difference.
The thing that I guess kind of stuck out most to me was Wilbur was very prepared in his fight. He did all of his work. He didn't just expect God to kind of just, okay, I'm here to help your children out, so you're going to help me. He did his research. He got his allies. He did the work. And it was one of those things where I kind of realized that if this is something that I truly want to do, that it's something that I need to be all in. I need to do my research. I need to do my work. I need to rely on God, but I also need him to rely on me to do the things that he asked me to do and to go out and to get the information that I need, kind of like Wilbur did. That family advocacy is an important job, but it's a job that you have to put a lot of work into and you have to be dedicated. And it was one of those things where I learned from this movie that I need to learn to put a lot more work into it and a lot more passion and drive, I guess.
Yeah, I talked about how he, in the medication, it was gonna, he felt like it would make him less focused, less able to do what he needed to do. And so he chose, and I'm not saying we need to be in pain to, advocate or something, but the point that, he put his work and God's work above his own comfort from the medication. And that I really liked that one of those times he was in pain, that he asked, to his wife to tell him about his family, about his future child. And that was a motivator for him. And I think that, it's, we have that and, be able to use that as your focus when things are hard. And that, even though slaves were not a part of his life, and so really what happened with them didn't necessarily affect him, they still mattered to him. I feel like a lot of child advocacy, they're not children that we see or families that we would see, but what advocates do and the changes that are made affect children and families. So caring about them, even if they're not your family or your sibling or you is important.
One thing that I thought that was really profound from the movie was his minister, John Newton. He wrote the song Amazing Grace as a result of Newton's repentance, when he was sailing the slave ship for 20 years. I thought that was awesome. Another thing was how Wilbur never gave up. And just like in child and family advocacy, that's a really good example for us to never give up, even when the times get tough and we're opposed by what we have to say. And this reminds me of a quote that we had earlier in our class by Edmund Burke. And the quote is, "All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men and women do nothing." And Wilbur certainly was not willing to stand by and do nothing. He was a great example of fighting for truth and light, and a great example for us in learning about advocacy. So we'll go to number 10. What was your understanding of the doctrine of the family at the beginning of the semester, and how has it changed?
So as we discussed before the meeting started, this question is a little difficult just because I think most of us grew up with the doctrine of the family. So I just put a couple of points. One of them is, in order to protect the family, we need to know the threats that are out there and be able to get rid of them or lessen their influence. And that's not the doctrine of the family, but that's one way to protect it. And I also said, this is more about the doctrine, excuse me. I said that men and women have their divine roles, but that they are equal in their responsibilities, and both must work together to do what is best for them to provide the best situation for all children. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, so for me, the traditional family is how it was growing up. But I've been able to learn through the semester that there are so many ways to have a family. There's not one correct dynamic. We just have to work together to figure out what is best for each individual.
Kind of like Courtney said, we did discuss this a little bit before the meeting, and one thing that I shared that I thought of, that this was a difficult question for me as well, just because, like she said, a lot of us did grow up with this doctrine. So not a whole lot of doctrinal understandings changed for me, but more so the content in which it would be used. And it, to me, I became, just growing up in a small town without a lot of, everyone here is Catholic, and there's like my family and two other families in our branch. And it's just one of those things where I kind of learned to just keep the doctrine to myself, where I knew the doctrine, but it was kind of like a me thing. No one else really needed to know it. And this class taught me more so how to share the doctrine and how to stand up with the doctrine more so than what the doctrine was. Because I had a pretty firm understanding of the doctrine. I just didn't understand necessarily when I would use that and how I could go about using that without offending. And this class really taught me more so that than anything else.
Yeah, I kind of agreed with Taylor, because I could have, I had a pretty good understanding of the doctrine, but I think it gave me more ways to share the doctrine in non-religious contexts, so other people can understand it and value it too, and why it's important for our society to have the same values as we do, and how that affects society. Talked about the understanding how much it, I guess just how it affects society. That was really the big thing for me, was just how to share it and how it affects people beyond just God's plan, I guess, and why it's God's plan, that it makes a difference in our lives.
I, I can now see many different ways that one person can advocate for the family. I see how a ripple effect can happen for good by just one person. But that person, needs to be surrounded by other good people to help them. And also my understanding of the doctrine of the family is it's now more universal. I see how important it is for the entire world to understand how important the family is. To our Heavenly Father, and how it really matters to Him, that we support our families, that we are in families. And a quote that I also found that was appropriate for this was from President Monson. The home is the laboratory of our lives, and what we learn there largely determines what we do when we leave there. So it just reminds me how important the home is in teaching our children and what we teach them in the short time that we have them. They'll go forward and share with the world. So those are some thoughts that I had written. Our last question, number 11, picture your spouse and children, current or future, and write down some thoughts about how they will benefit from you taking this class.
So for this one, I had multiple thoughts, but I'll just share a couple. One of them was I now understand how important it is to be compassionate towards all, even when they have differing views. We talked a lot in this class about having compassion for those who may have different views than you do, and being able to have a discussion with them without it turning into a huge argument, without one or the other being angry, but just listening to them, loving them, being like, okay, like I understand that's how you see it. Here's how I see it, and sharing our views in a more loving and kind manner. And another thing was, I can share with them the power of one and how one person can truly make a difference. Before the semester, I didn't see how one person could really make a difference. I mean, I have seen it throughout history, but this helped to just solidify it, especially with family advocacy.
So I'll share two thoughts. The first being that I think that the main benefit that would come from me taking this class is I think the more that I understand the importance of family, the more apt I am to raise a family in righteousness. And clearly, a lot of the points that we have made is making a difference by being an example. And I think that by taking this class, my family, I will put a little bit more consideration into the watchful eyes that we will be under. And it has kind of made me start to think about, okay, well, these are the things that we need to focus on in our family if we hope to make a difference by being an example. Because if I make that a priority based off of my learning, then it's something that we'll be better equipped to do. And the second being, we talked about how there's strength in numbers. And I think that if I can be a good example in my family, that I will then teach my children to advocate for families, and they will then teach their children to advocate for families. And I think that being in this class, I've come to understand the importance of yes, there is power in one, but there's also power in numbers. And if I can truly understand what we've been taught in this class and truly teach those things to my children, then the difference will continue to be made.
I talked about, I guess it gives me a better understanding of the threats that face families, and I guess more prepared to both prevent them from affecting my family and fix the problem if it occurs, if something happens, deal with it when it comes, and to help teach my children the same things. And just gave me a lot of information, I guess, on how to help my family, and just I guess, more courage to stand up for our family and to, help my children see that I have, I believe in the doctrine, and that I'm willing to defend it and stand up for it and to teach them it.
I put that they'll know more about the benefits of standing up for truth and light, and they'll learn many of the, they've learned many of the things that I've already learned in this class because I share it with them. They're learning how to advocate for themselves, and they're learning how important it is to stand up for others when they're unjustly treated. They'll understand more the importance of the family proclamation and how it is important to continually defend it. And their compassion within them will grow. Their desire to serve others will grow. Giving service is one way that we keep families and communities connected. It helps aid us in developing our goodness. So I love the quote, teach your children to care. It's a great message, because when we teach our children to care about little things, then they'll care about other things when they get older. And empathy for others will develop, and they'll be able to be effective advocates. So that's all. I just want to say thanks, guys, for being a part of my group this semester. It's been a great group, and I've enjoyed working with all of you guys. I've learned so much from you guys.
Yeah, same here. I definitely look forward to our group meetings. I mean, being online classes, I have other group meetings, and I'm sitting there like, if I can just make it to this class, then this group will make the day better.
Yeah, this one's been good.